So.
Are we going to take turns?
No, I don't think we're taking turns, Terry, unless you want to come up, Debbie, unless you want to come up and do the preaching this week, then we can trade places. Is that what you meant? Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. And this morning is St. Patrick's Day. For anybody who didn't remember that, I wore a green shirt. It's the only green shirt I have, sort of green, in my closet. Before we get started talking about this message, let's have a word of prayer. Our gracious Father, we thank you so much for those that are watching, for those that are here. We just ask your blessing on this Sabbath day, Father, that we might receive your Spirit, that we might learn more about you, that we might be able to share your love more fully. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. What do you think of when you think of St. Patrick's Day?
Green beer.
Holiday.
Green beer, holiday. Do you know that next to Christmas, St. Patrick's Day is probably the most celebrated holiday, at least according to one website that I looked at. Do you know where it came from? Why it's there? St. Patrick is the patron saint of where?
Irish.
Ireland.
Irish. But you know what? He is not from Ireland. He was Scottish. In fact, even though he was born to Scottish parents, he lived in Europe, in England. And when he was a teenager, he was kidnapped, and he did forced labor in Ireland for 6 years, until one night he had a dream that he was going to be taken away by a boat, and that he was going to come back and he was going to do something wonderful for Ireland. But he escaped. He went back and reunited with his family, and a couple years later he moved on to France, and he became a priest, and then he went back to Ireland. And in 432, I think it was, they said that they declared the state of Ireland a Christian nation because of the work of St. Patrick. And on March 17th, supposedly, most people say that was the day he died. And of course, there was a big to-do about where his body should be buried. And different cities within Ireland fought over where their patron saint should be buried. And so there are official memorials in three different places for you to go to. But you know, the one thing you think about with Irish and St. Patrick is you think about luck. And the luck of the Irish, and well, my dumb luck, and just my luck. And then if it weren't for bad luck, maybe I would have no luck at all. You know, we tend to think about luck in terms of good things. And every once in a while it doesn't turn out that way. And then we start to play the blame game. Now, believe it or not, there's a song and a movie, both of this type, and so there's a lot of slides on this. But where do you suppose all the blame started? It's natural for us to think that this is where it started. Right? Back in Genesis 3:12, the man said, and this is to God, he said, "The woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate it."
Apple.
Right? And so God turns to the woman and says, "Well, what about this?" And she said, no, it wasn't me. It was the serpent. He deceived me, and I ate. So basically what they're saying, and the thing that we all say, is it's not my fault. I'm not to blame for this. Somebody else is to blame for this. And amongst all of this, we have to look at where is the accountability? Where's the responsibility? Where do we say, this is mine? I own this. Every choice you make is based on a decision that you have. It's not always about your parents or the economy or the weather, the government, you name the thing that you want to blame things on. It's not always their fault. Sometimes it's based on the decisions that you have made. Now, the thing that my wife always tells me is that there's always an exception to every rule. When I try and say how specific something is and how universal something is, she can always find that one little thing. Well, there are some things. The other day I was over in Oakley, and it was terrible wind. Remember that a couple of weeks ago we had that terrible wind? They closed the highway for a while. There were some cars that were parked out by one of the buildings over there, and there was a big EMS tower that was up there, right? And the wind blew the EMS tower down on about a half a dozen cars. The radio tower. Now, that wasn't anybody's fault, was it? Are you going to say it's their fault because they parked in the parking lot? Or are we going to say, well, it's the person who put up the tower didn't use strong enough bolts, and are we going to, sooner or later we just have to realize sometimes stuff just happens. And we don't know why it happens or what we're supposed to do with it. But there's an intriguing little creature that I just have a love-hate relationship with, and that's the ant. Because when you think about ants, when you were little, did you ever play with ants? Torture ants, maybe, just a little bit. But in a way, it's sort of torture. Because you see those little strings where ants are just going to and from home to food, and they're just going back and forth, and you put something in the way. And what do the ants do? Do they all turn around and go home and complain to the boss that something? No, they find a way around the problem. The ingenuity that they have. I found one of these slides where the ants were using themselves as a bridge. They tied onto each other. But I think this was pretty creative, that they would find a little stick, and they would, and that's always amazing to me as well. Have you ever watched how strong ants are, how they carry stuff, and 10 times their body weight? It's just amazing. They don't complain about it. They just resolve the issue. They use their best efforts to resolve the problem. And that's the same thing that our parents did. When they heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden, the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord amongst the trees in the garden. Then the Lord called out to them and said, "Where are you?" And Adam answered back, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid myself." Where are you? God is calling out to each of us, and so often in life we hide ourselves from God because we realize, just like our first parents, Adam and Eve, that we're just a little bit naked. Now let me ask you this question. What does naked really mean? What do you suppose the next slide's going to be, right? I do it all the time. Definition of naked, right? Not covered by clothing, nude. Devoid of customary or natural covering. Now, that can take on a lot of different meanings. And the thing that I would like to share with you from a human perspective is we all look at ourselves and we decide we need to cover this up. Nobody needs to see. There's some things you can't unsee, and there's some things you don't want to see. So we cover that up. And we see parts of ourselves that we don't want other people to see. So we cover it up, maybe not physically with clothing, but we cover it up emotionally with our attitude and the persona that we put on to other people. But look back in time. I love Ellen White as a writer, and in the little book Maranatha on page 79, she wrote this: "The white robe of innocence was worn by our first parents when they were placed by God in the Holy Eden. But when sin entered, they severed their connection with God, and the light that had encircled them departed." Do you remember what it's like to be a baby, or maybe grandbabies you've seen, and they're perfectly comfortable being naked? I remember when I was a little boy, well, I don't remember it, I remember the stories my mom told of it. She would get my brother and I dressed up for church, and she had to keep close tabs on us because our favorite thing to do was to go out and get dirty. And we would get in so much trouble for going out and getting dirty this was always before church. And so our favorite thing to do was get dirty. So because we didn't want to get in trouble, what we would do on more than one occasion, I guess, was we would take our clothes off in the park and lay them somewhere. And my brother and I would run around naked, or maybe just in our underwear, I don't know. But so we wouldn't get our church clothes dirty, right? We realized that our behavior was not good enough. So we did whatever we could to make ourselves a little more acceptable and to try to not be in trouble. Isn't that what Adam and Eve did with the fig leaves? This is what fig leaves look like, I guess. I don't know. I understand they're fairly rough. And they maybe don't do such a good job of covering. But don't we all do things to cover up what we perceive our inadequacies to be? We get fancy degrees, or we put on fancy clothes. We live in fancy houses, and we drive fancy cars. Of course, you notice I picked something that I don't own in the fancy car category. We have fancy jobs, fancy jewelry. We have all sorts of things that we use to hide our perceived inadequacies. Now, what do you suppose inadequate means, right? Lacking the quality or quantity required, insufficient for a purpose. And what would that purpose be, do you suppose? In our core of cores, don't we all want to be loved, admired, liked, approved of? Right? And so what we do is we try and do things ourselves. And we make these lists of things. I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this. And if I do all those things, then I get a job. Right? That sounds like goal-oriented lifestyle, doesn't it? We're doing all these things in order to get to our goal. But when you think back a little bit, into the book of Genesis, when God gave the 10 Commandments, look at what the people said. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. We're going to do all this. You give us a list, and we'll follow the list. And don't we do that today? Even as Christians, we say, God, show us a list, show us all the don'ts, show us all the do's, we'll take care of that. But we know that doesn't always work. I've said this over and over again. You know, Jesus told a story about people, and when they come to the kingdom, he says, they say, Lord, Lord, open unto us. Haven't we done? And they go through that list. And he says, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. Well, I did the list. Doesn't that count for something? Apparently not, according to Isaiah 64. And this is from I believe it's the Voice version. We've sinned and kept at it so long, there isn't any hope for us. Can we be saved? We're all sin-infected, sin-contaminated. Our best efforts are like grease-stained rags. We try, and we try, and we try, but it seems like the harder we try, the farther behind we get. We can't see the end from the beginning the way that God does. Look at the next one here. Proverbs 14:12. There's a way that seems right unto a man, but its end is the way of death. Now, of course, women might take this as a prophecy about men not wanting to take directions or ask for directions or something like that. Because there's a way that seems right to the guy, but he really should pull over and ask for directions. The directions we should be asking for are directions from God. Instead of blaming our wife or our spouse or blaming somebody else, our boss, the government, the economy, something like that, we should take a little bit of accountability for ourselves and realize we can't fix the problem that we've created. In Genesis 3:21, finishing up our story there just a little bit, the Lord made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. God knows that you feel uncomfortable about being naked. You feel uncomfortable about being exposed. And so he wants to do something to cover you. Now, I don't believe for one heartbeat that God thinks that our naked form is in any way inadequate or indecent. He made us that way. We're not like, look at all the different animals. They have feathers or fur or something like that. People aren't that way. We're born without those things. God intended for us to have some sort of a different covering and to not be ashamed of our nakedness. So like that slide with the little baby. Little babies aren't afraid of being naked. They enjoy being naked. They run around the house naked all the time. When my kids and my grandkids, that's their favorite thing. Strip off their clothes, their diaper, and run around the house naked. They feel good that way. And many adults feel good that way too. That's why you have nudist colonies all over the place. They feel comfortable. They're not worried that they might have a little too much weight or a few scars here and there or whatever. They're okay. But most of us are not that way. And so what we tend to do is we point fingers. It's your fault, it's your fault, your fault. Anything but my fault. So when we play this blaming game, who is really at fault? Who are we really blaming when we have a problem? The buck has to stop somewhere. And it has to be God, like with our first parents. It's the woman that you gave me. It's the snake that you put in the garden. It's not my fault. In fact, it went so far that, remember the story when, and this goes back to our scripture reading that was before we were on tape. The children of Israel had been led out of captivity. They were on their way to freedom. They were on their way to the promised land, and all they could do was grumble and complain and fuss to the point where Moses had to say, what am I going to do with these people? They're about ready to stone me. They're blaming me for dragging them out here in the wilderness, and they got nothing to drink. So God said, I will stand before you. God already had a plan in mind. I'm going to be in front of you. Then go take and strike the rock, and water will come forth. And we know the story. There's so much that God already has figured out that we don't begin to perceive because we're so busy looking at what can I do. From a natural standpoint, what was Moses going to do out in the middle of the desert? It doesn't make sense to hit a rock and get water to come out. Any of you ever done that? You go out in the desert, and you're thirsty, so you just grab a rock, you start banging on that rock, try and get water out. Does that work? We become creative. We think, well, if we're out in the desert, we'll find a cactus and we'll squeeze it and we'll get a little water out of it. That's what we do. God, he doesn't take a cactus and squeeze it out and get water. He takes a rock and opens it up and we get water. So often in life, we don't get what we want. And so, and I'm going to take you to the book of James for just a little while, James 4. There are wars and battles that go on all over our planet. And it's all based on greed, is what it's saying here in the first couple verses of James. Where do these wars and battles between ourselves first start? Is it not precisely in the desires fighting inside your own selves? You want something, you lack it. So what do? You kill. You have an ambition that you cannot satisfy. So you fight to get your own way by force. You ever found yourself doing that? Struggling? You ever see little kids do that? Struggling? They're so frustrated, they want something, and they just pitch a fit and fall in it. But look at the secret here. I said this to my children countless times. You do not have because you do not ask God. If we want something, all we have to do to go... when my kids want something, they say, Dad, can I have? Right? And what does Dad say? No, you don't deserve it. Of course not. Some dads might, right? This dad didn't. I might ask a question like this one. You ask for something and you don't receive it because you ask for it with the wrong motivation. You have the wrong reason in mind. Sometimes you're selfish or greedy. Like when one child will ask for something just so they can be better off than their sibling, right? And so parents can see through that sort of stuff. Sometimes our motives are wrong. We don't get what we want because we ask for it in the wrong way or with the wrong motivation. We need to humble ourselves. If we resist the devil, he will flee from us. If we come close to God, God will come close to us. Now remember I asked that question about where did this all start? Before there was an Adam and Eve to blame God for the snake and the spouse, do you suppose there was any blaming that went on in heaven? Do you suppose that maybe there was somebody up in heaven who was dissatisfied with their position and decided just to go around to all their friends, all their buddies and say, we could have a little more freedom and work for the big guy. He's the one that's causing all of our trouble. If you would follow me and do things my way, we can have anything we want. After all, you guys are so smart. You don't need those rules and regulations that mean guy is putting out there. Story sound familiar? Did you ever think, one of my daughters said something I thought was kind of interesting when we were on vacation. And she said that she had read somewhere that it was our generation, us old people, that messed things up. And when I think about it, think back, a lot of us here in the room, and maybe some of you watching the video, can remember what it was like back in the 60s. There was love in the air, and everybody was free, and who was at fault? It was the man, right? We don't know who that was, but the man was at fault. And it was big government and big corporations and all of these different things, and don't we see sort of a replication of that today? What's at fault in our society? Oh, it's all these big corporations. We don't call it the man anymore. We just say it's the one percenters, is what people say. But we still have that person to blame. And what we're doing is we're still casting that blame and dispersion upon God. And what we need to do is we need to stop blaming. We need to stop complaining. 1 Thessalonians tells us, in all things give thanks. We're supposed to thank God for the things that we have. Somebody told me once upon a time that the quickest way to get your kids in shape is to send them on a mission trip. And the reason you get your kids in shape again by sending them on a mission trip is you can actually see, I don't know if any of the rest of you have ever watched 3ABN is a TV station that you can get on Dish Network for sure, and certainly you can find it on some other satellite venues as well. But in the afternoon they have Maranatha stories, and they have people that will go on these mission trips. And it completely changes their perspective because the things that we take for granted, not just take for granted, the things we complain about because they're not good enough. When's the last time you heard somebody complain about the dial-up speed? Oh wait, we don't have dial-up anymore. Think about those countries that don't even have dial-up. You know, we complain because the water's not hot enough at the hotel or something. What about those places that don't even have running water? That don't even have a toilet? Go on a mission trip to someplace like that and see how happy those people are. You know, those ants that I was talking about earlier, when's the last time you heard an ant complain about something? Right? We don't necessarily have the hearing to hear that. They don't complain about it. You know, I every once in a while I'll get up really early in the morning. I don't like to get up early in the morning, but I'll get up early enough in the morning to hear the birds singing. Have you ever heard the birds singing in the midst of a storm? Have you ever heard the birds singing when it's snowing outside? It's just amazing that they can still offer their praises to God in those circumstances that for most of us would be fairly devastating. And you know the other thing that's interesting about that, if you don't hear the birds singing, you don't hear anything at all. So if you're not singing praises, maybe follow the example of the birds and keep your trap shut. There's a mental process that goes on in our mind when all we do is complain about things, when we're always finding fault with things, when we're always blaming the other person and ultimately blaming God for our situation. Because after all, if God is all-seeing, all-knowing, all-loving, and we're in this bad position, clearly God's not doing his job. Right? I had another conversation with one of my other daughters, and we were talking about how difficult God's job is. When I think about I like to use this example from Minnesota. Because in Minnesota, they measure snow by the feet, not like Kansas where we measure by the inch. We say we're going to get 3 or 4 inches of snow here, and they start closing schools and other venues. In Minnesota, they 3 or 4 inches of snow. Oh, great. We were in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago, and it snowed. And it snowed. And you know what I saw? I saw people on snowmobiles. Right? They got out there, run around, have a good time. I saw people running all over town with pickups with blades on the front. That snow was a blessing to all of those people for recreation or financial remuneration. Right? We see snow as a problem because it interferes with our ability to do what we want to do. Just like the rain. No, I don't think anybody complained about the rain we had here yesterday because I thought it was wonderful. But it was cold, and what one person considers a blessing, somebody else considers a curse. That's what my daughter and I were talking about. And how difficult it is for God to bless everybody at the same time because we want things so differently. You've decided on a picnic in the park or a wedding in an outdoor venue, and all of a sudden it rains. Well, how about that farmer? I heard something yesterday I thought was interesting, that the city of Colby has been put on a water restriction. You're supposed to limit your water use. Did you guys know that? Well, now you do. It doesn't apply to us in the above the country. I'm sure it does too. The water table is so low. We need to give thanks in all things, in good times and in bad as well. Because we have a God that will supply all of our needs according to his riches, not according to the things that we do or the things that we try to do anyway. That's our blessing for today, is to remember that God is in charge and he has the riches to supply all our needs. Amen.